So we're looking at the high intensity range lesson today, just going over the concepts of that, expectations in the course, expectations in the learning, some upgraded ways of thinking around this stuff. And we're going to create some discussion around that. So we'll start off by defining high intensity range work, what that means to us as range of strength coaches. We'll discuss the methods of application and programming. That's always my big focus point with all of these lessons, is to really get your minds thinking about how you can program this stuff so that you can have big wins, and also think about how you can troubleshoot your programming and think about different scenarios and those sort of things. And then we'll review some practical standards and have a little Q&A powwow, talk about some of these things that we're talking about, some of your other learnings or experiences that you're working with. And I can always share mine as well too around that. So high intensity range. So this is a big lesson because it gets into what we will think of as the more advanced flexibility training methods and protocols. And the best way to, that's weird that I broke the sentence up like that, but the best way to look at how we want to define this is like the exercise that produces the greatest force in the outer range. With some of the basic preparatory range categories like body weight static stretches, we are getting into outer range work, and also with some of the introduction to the loaded range work and that kind of stuff. But when we start to think about categorizing something as high intensity, we're going to be thinking more about how it produces the greater force. So we're starting to push the limits more as we start to basically get into high intensity work. That's the way of thinking that we want to be thinking about with this. These exercises also should be looked at as multi-joint, large muscle group movements. And as an example, the horse stance is a good example of that. So the horse stance would be more all-encompassing to the adductors in one exercise. It also recruits the quads and the hips as well. So it's very large, very big movement. And within that and how we prescribe it, it becomes a high intensity range of strength exercise. So this would be like the big difference between traditional flexibility and the way of thinking we're presenting in this lesson, in this certification. When we implement and work up the chain to high intensity range work, we are doing so with both our dynamic active exercises, flexibility exercises. So this would be like our exercises we're moving in, like the Jefferson curl and the incline dislocates, but we're also doing it with the static active movements as well too. So our isometrics. Traditional flexibility protocols really only focus on high intensity exercises with isometrics, but we're pushing the envelope more as range of strength coaches, and we're taking people to another level when we're doing so with our dynamic active exercise as well too. This type of exercise has been proven to produce the best results for improving static passive flexibility. So the steps we've laid out so far in each lesson, body weight statics, agonist activations, loaded range work, these are the foundations. We want to move someone along the way to get through these points so that we can focus more on this stuff and see those results. Static passive flexibility is the hardest thing to see improvement on. And it's the biggest thing that clients and athletes we work with will struggle with. If you've worked with people, you know that already. They already are defeated when it comes to flexibility because their passive flexibility is below average and they don't know how to break that cycle. With your learnings and your training, you know how to break that cycle for them by conditioning them up to a point where you can apply high intensity range and flexibility exercise with them. And once you get to that point, that's when stuff starts to happen. And no one thinks this way when they train flexibility. They don't think about high intensity work. If you start presenting that to somebody, you're like, okay, we're going to be working up to a point where we're doing high intensity range work, high intensity flexibility. They will be like, I don't understand what you're talking about. Like, doesn't make sense. but this is just a different way of thinking for them, but it is the way we want to be thinking as flexibility coaches. So let's talk about programming. And within the course content and the way that the Ranger Strength System is presented to you, high intensity range work would be falling in the categories of strength specific and specific range work. So again, just to review, specific range work is most specific to the expression of range in that core movement. So side split, front split, back bridge, those kind of movements. So, the movements that are the most specific to that are usually of high intensity, because it's the greatest expression of that range is going to be of a high intensity movement. But our strength components, we want to be utilizing those in such a way that we are moving ourselves up to a higher degree of conditioning, to a higher intensity. So I believe that we can introduce high intensity range work at all levels. Obviously, that's going to change from someone who's more advanced, intermediate to beginner. But beginners just need that little bit of exposure to some of these movements to grasp and understand what it is that they're getting themselves into, to kind of see the bigger picture. We're going to be introducing them at a low intensity when we get into strength specific range work, Jefferson curls and good mornings. So we are slowly introducing them to higher intensity movements, but it's when we know that we can introduce them to a long lunge and a horse stance and these greater outer range movements that do have a very good control mechanism to them. The horse stance, the knees are bent. So we know that if we get them into a wide stance with knees bent, it's much more of a controlled environment than if we get them to do so with a straight leg. So we can control the intensities and introduce these greater outer range movements at a lower level, while also knowing how to introduce it at a more advanced level as well too. And I'll talk a little bit more about how you would approach that when I talk about prescription, or best ways, I think, to approach that. It's always important for you to think about how you can couple components of range of strength together to obviously create more efficient sessions, to better build strategy within your way that you program and address muscular imbalances, and things of that nature. So with high intensity range work, we want to think more about coupling it with something, if we're going to do so, of the lowest intensity. And the lowest intensity in our course learnings is the body weight static stretches, because those stretches are of the lowest category. They can be scaled to a point where they are harder for somebody, but we know how to scale them for them to be very introductory. And what we would want to be thinking about when coupling with high intensity range work is doing so with movements that are opposite or antagonist to the movement that we're doing. So for example, if I am doing an isometric side split, I'm not going to couple that with a frog stretch or another, like a soft body weight static adductor stretch, because I'm already doing so without my isometric side split. But I would consider coupling that with something of like a piriformis stretch, a hip capsule stretch, an internal rotation stretch, something that's complementary to the opposite of the movement. So when we do get into high intensity range exercise, we have to think about recovery between sets. For some reason, I see this a lot with the way other people have programmed flexibility. Like when I've studied like gymnastic bodies and other systems, there was like really not any rest prescribed through high intensity work. And we got to think about smarter ways that we can do it, especially as we move into high intensity range training, high intensity exercise. So as we start moving into something that's of a higher intensity, we can use the coupling effect or the coupling strategy of ways to just build in recovery. So let's look at some prescription strategies, like how we would prescribe this, best methods for building it into programming. And we can probably have a discussion around that after so as well, like looking at that, what you've experienced, how you've been using it, so to speak. And like I said before, so we're thinking about the static active flexibility and the dynamic active flexibility work. And in its prescription, isometric holds fall under that static active flexibility category. And an isometric hold that is within the window of 30 seconds upwards to 2 minutes. And then beyond that, we do start to fall into diminishing returns. We're not getting as much out of the stretch as we would. But it is something, these kind of capacities have to be built up over time. So having a smaller work window in isometrics of 30 seconds is a smart strategy to start exposing individuals to high intensity flexibility exercise. So within that, I was talking about exposure method, like strategies for exposing individuals that are new to high intensity range of strength exercise. So a 10 to 15 second window of work. I commonly use this. I've just always used it as a way to just expose someone to a greater range. And that exposure kind of idea can be used with any range of strength kind of exercise. So even if it's a body weight static exercise, like oftentimes with a couch stretch, someone just feels really stuck, but they know they almost focus too much on the amount of time that they have to hold the stretch for, when they do have a greater range that is accessible to them, but they can't hold that range for long. So it's very similar to strength training. So what we would want to be thinking about here as a strategy, like once someone has demonstrated good technique, a good foundation, like consistency in learning how to do it and execute properly, we would then look at how we could expose them to a greater range for just a little short burst. Because the idea there too, I know a lot of coaches actually end up doing this without talking much about it. It's like, how will you ever get to that point or know what it feels like to be there until you're actually there? So once you feel confident that someone could hold a position for 10 to 15 seconds with good form and then back off out of it and then get back into building a little bit more endurance, like drop setting or coming back. Like it's a different way of thinking about flexibility training, but it does work quite well. Most coaches that get high level results with flexibility training just do this anyway without really talking much about it. So that would be how you would be using exposure method. So it can be used for basic static stretching, bodyweight static stretches. It also can be used for the high intensity work as well too. So often another example, high intensity, moving from 3-step stance to 5-step stance. So once someone's like, they're demonstrating like a really strong 3-step stance, maybe they're only holding it for like 60 seconds, but it's looking super strong. Technique's looking good. Next workout, we might say, okay, we're going to just try the 5-step for just some quick exposure, just to kind of see what happens to the body as you change. And then we're going to move back to 3-step. So just kind of brainstorm a little bit how you could make that a little more tailored to individuals with using that method. So the ISO side split would be, static active isometric movement. You can go to the library in the course and look through a lot of these exercises and make those connections. That's a good example. Dynamic active flexibility. So movement-based range of strength exercises. So now thinking about possibly a 1 to 5 rep range. So more advanced individuals maybe thinking about a 1 rep Jefferson curl. Okay, so as you start getting really good at Jefferson curls, as you start getting really good at seated good mornings, you start to think about how you can increase the intensity and push the envelope to build more strength. And you would start to think about applying traditional strength training protocols to this type of programming. And, anything under 3 reps, like that should be an advanced person that's using weight under 3 reps with heavier loads. That being said, though, at more beginner intermediate levels, it's okay for us to introduce these movements at a low rep range with lighter weight as well too. So it's, it's not enforced that they have to do 5 reps. It's just recommended that you build someone's conditioning up to a good 5 rep range with a current weight before adding more weight. So say I'm working with someone who's very banged up and broken and can't touch past their knees. Even just using 10-pound weight and having them doing nice slow Jefferson curl to get just past the knee and come up for 1 rep, and then dropping the weight and actually, using their own body weight or what have you, like just think about strategies around that. But this would be the kind of work window we want to think about with high intensity work. So some examples of that. So now long lunge is such a cool movement because we can, make it static active or dynamic active in that we are just doing a hold or we're doing a pulse. And we can do so with horse stance as well too. And some of those other movements you see in the range of strength library. It's good to not just be fixed on one exercise. That's maybe one of the other reasons why flexibility training traditionally needs to be upgraded, is because it's really just given us like a very small amount of exercise to think about, especially in high intensity. It's basically like isometric splits. Just work your isometric splits. It's like, okay, there's a lot of ways that we can vary that and get more creative with that. And when we do start thinking about change in the outer range and change in big positions that take a lot of time, we have to be more creative about the stimulus. We have to change up the stimulus. Incline dislocates would be another good example of, high intensity exercise with range of strength. And some examples of how we can think about prescribing these things in a workout. So the coupling idea, this would be a good example of how you would use a preparatory range exercise, body weight static exercise to couple with a high intensity range exercise like long lunge pulse, paired with a tibialis stretch, repeat for 3 rounds. You could maybe build that a little bit more to have a longer protocol. But if I were to use this one specifically, it may be at the end of a session. If someone was doing a more traditional full-on session of like conditioning and strength work, and then we're going to they're at a level where they're competent enough to get into some long lunge pulses and just some tibialis stretches. And then this would be something like I program this for myself quite a bit. This kind of way of like warming up with my preparatory work, doing my strength work, finishing with some high intensity range work. And then another good example would be just going through ABC series, which basically would be going back at the lessons we've previously went over and taking, lesson 1, 2, 3, and just making series out of it. The B series being the loaded range and range agonist activations we talked about last lesson, how they couple very nicely in a session and complement each other. And then the body weight statics being more preparatory, so warming the body up. So if we were building like a full-on session, not thinking about integrating within a session, we would think about something greater like this. And like we have discussed within some of our other support calls about integrating, A series, B series, C series is basically how you think about integrating anyway. Like if I was doing some traditional strength work, B series would be where I do that. And then high intensity range work would be more in my C series. Okay. So practical application for the course is the ability to execute and demonstrate that you have core competency in the 3-step horse stance with hips parallel to the knees for 2 minutes, and a straight leg, straight arm, elevated back bridge hold for 30 seconds. So shoulders stacked, straight arms, and legs straight, but legs elevated. If you did it from the floor, that's just a better demonstration of that. But basically, to become a range of strength coach, this would be the physical demonstration you need to demonstrate. So the 3-step horse stance, hips parallel to the knee. So those quantitative outcomes for 2 minutes. And the straight leg, straight arm elevated bridge, shoulders stacked. I am going to attach the time under tension methods for range. That was a call that we did a couple months ago, which stands very well to high intensity range work. This is where you want to learn and the in-depths of time under tension methods for range. So you want to really know the application of other different systems, why they work, what works best, what experiences I've had and others have had. So that support call, if you haven't seen it, I'm going to attach it to this lesson when you go into the uni under range of strength. And I want you to review that lesson and just keep that lesson in your back pocket as like a way to just go back and refer to these time under tension methods where, contract, relax, isometric contractions, Thomas Kerr's favorite methods. And then of course the range of strength library is there now in the certification. So that it's there as like your toolbox for range of strength, like preparatory strength, specific range exercises that work well and can be programmed with individuals or in groups and things like that. So let's open it up for some questions. I want to hear from you guys like that have had experience using some of these things with yourself and with others. Like, have we gotten into high intensity range work with others? Like, have you started to experience what that's like? Because this is when it becomes more of a troubleshooting scenario for you as a coach when you start integrating these kind of things with people.
I think when you build people up to the high intensity range work a little bit, like for example, with some of my athletes, one practice we did or a couple of times we did where we worked up to, and I had them get into their back bridge or challenge them to try like an elevated back bridge and that sort of thing. And some of them were just like, is it like that wow factor of like, holy cow, like this is what we're aiming for. But then also some of them, it was kind of like, oh, like this is what we're working up to. And it's like, oh, like I can already kind of do this. And then there you just have to find ways like, okay, like how can we challenge this for you? And, some people, like if I'm working with my younger athletes, they can do a back bridge just fine, but are they thinking about, extending the legs and pushing through to stack the shoulders over the hands,
right?
Sort of things. And then trying to see, okay, the details, like the finer points of the movement, are they like for that position, are they extending like through the low back more, or are they actually getting into the thoracic?
Right.
And that's where like trying the different things between like a regular bridge and the elevated bridge that kind of takes the low back a little bit more out of flexion and kind of it, or out of that extended position to like kind of highlight the thoracic more. It's like interesting to kind of see those differences and where points. People. Yeah.
It's the hardest thing about high intensity range exercises is for us as coaches is going to be our ability to coach those exercises, the qualitative measurements of the exercises, because this is where people can abuse the form because they don't know it. It's like, are you just asking me to stand really wide and do a squat? It's like, no, we really want to work on extending it through the lumbar. We want to work on pulling the knees out. The feet should be positioned in such a way where we're getting the most flexion through the hips. We want a vertical trunk, but we can also play with the trunk to get deeper. Like, so, I mean, this is where you guys for the course can really get into the study of the videos I've attached in the library to like figure out and troubleshoot. Okay, this is an elevated bridge tutorial. This is a low bridge tutorial. Okay, well, I have questions. You can post questions in the workplace and we'll like figure out how to troubleshoot that more. But yeah, elevated bridge, that's definitely one of those ones that some people will, okay, well, you're just asking me to bend and get up into on my hands and knees, right? And you see the back bending a lot. They're not thinking about being stacked. The legs are really bent. And that's actually maybe a good topic to even talk about right now is like, what do we want to look for in a back bridge? What kind of milestones? Because that's where people struggle too. Because with flexibility exercises, you're just looking at someone doing it and you're like, okay, I'm just going to try to do that. I'm just going to try to create that shape. So milestones for back bridge, your first milestone is a vertical arm elevated. Okay. So like, well, even below, I guess let's go even below that because elevated, the funny thing about an elevated bridge is that it's an easier position to be into to like build strength in these qualities, but it's a harder position to get to. Right. So like the greatest thing we could do for someone who doesn't have a spotter, that doesn't know how to spot a bridge. I shared spotting as a video. I think that's there. If you guys don't have that video on how to spot a bridge, just ask me for it. I'll send it to you or drop the link. But if someone doesn't have it, we have to have a solution for them. And the solution is the low bridge hold. Because the low bridge hold, it's static. It builds low end strength in a specific position. So usually if someone can't find full extension, they're just going to go as high as they can anyway, because that's the easiest thing for them to do. To get someone to draw in and hold just below the ground, that's very difficult if they lack strength. So the low bridge hold, it's very specific to a low position. And then from there, we want to think about how we're going to start moving someone into an elevated bridge. So that's where the vertical arm as a first milestone is a good milestone, because think about how high of an elevation someone's going to need when they start off to have a really nice bridge or to take load off the back. Like they're going to need a pretty high elevation, and that's going to feel impossible. So if we start them at a low elevation and we say it's okay to bend your legs, because if you bend your legs, you take the load off your back. It's when I start to try to straighten my legs in a low elevation, I load my low back more. So your first milestone becomes, let's just work on a lower elevation that allows you to find a vertical arm. And once they find a vertical arm, we build strength. So, build the time under tension. And then we start thinking about increasing the elevation so that the legs can straighten. Once all these things start happening, we can get into bridge push-ups and stuff, but we have to think about, like, we want to know how to create a progressive journey for someone in these shapes. It's really what it is, right? It's not straightforward. It's not like a squat. Go up and down. Just go up and down. Keep adding weight, getting better at that. This is an expression of a shape, and we have to create milestones for that. But yeah, so that was, a really good topic and talking about like how you expose a group or individuals to it, and they don't understand, the qualities that are expected of that position. We need to know our qualities. We can't tell someone to do a bridge if we don't know what qualities they want to be obtaining in the bridge. So Gabriel, asking about the low bridge. Did you need me to clarify the low bridge, or?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, no, it's just that you were asking at some point, and so I just answered, like, to give a
yeah, the low
but
bridge.
Yeah. But I think that was more rhetorical, so that's fine.
Yeah, for sure. Have you been introducing people to some high intensity positions?
So I've tried. Currently, I have 2 clients that I'm working on flexibility with, and One of them is the one we talked about already, and this one is very very restricted. So I haven't introduced him to any high intensity. When I tried to do the horse stance, but even 3 steps, he couldn't get his hips leveled to his knees. Um, so yeah, I gave up on that. And the other one,
go ahead.
yeah,
Go ahead.
the other one, I did the horse stance and the long lunge, and much better. Actually, surprisingly good horse stance. Like he could get a 5-step out pretty easily, but he's a tennis player, so kind of made sense to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a good.
The long lunge was tougher though for him.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good one to bring up, though, is the horse stance, the qualities we want to look for in a horse stance. So it's kind of a similar discussion to the back bridge. So if someone can't get up and demonstrate, straight arms, straight legs, I'm going to break it down a bit further. And I would say it's okay for you to prescribe and work a horse stance to the level that they can work at, especially if it's just short exposures. Because it's going to allow them you're going to see them getting lower. It's the quality we want over time, which is the hips in line with the knee. Mm-hmm. But if you can't demonstrate that right away, I'm still going to make you train it. It's like doing a pancake without being able to touch your chest to the floor, right? You're still going to train it. You need that exposure to it. Yeah. You need to develop that strength. So yeah, I'm not a stiffler on someone having to hit like a certain, I guess, absolute with the qualities, as long as the qualities are still there at whatever position they can move to. Yeah. So if he does like a partial squat, but he has like a beautiful anterior tilt, lumbar extension, nice flexed hips, and you can see that he's getting the stimulus, the strength in that range, outer range that he doesn't ever get exposed to, that's a huge win. Because if you build that up, like say you even get him up to like 30 seconds to 60 seconds, you can then just put a little dumbbell between his legs, hanging in his hands, and he's going to get that assistance to kind of start coming down. He's built up a good base, and now he's getting that loaded range exposure to this new operating training zone kind of position. So
yeah, that's what I was going to ask about loading. I was going to ask you if you would load to assist to get deeper into the range at first, but probably not at first, right? Like you would wait for him to maintain the good qualities that we want, but once he reaches better times, probably, like you mentioned, a minute.
No, I would load like
30 seconds a minute.
He's not going to hurt himself if you give him 10 pounds. You know what I mean? Like he's not going to hurt himself, and he's already working through a range. Like if you can identify the range that he is capable of moving in first, and be like, okay, we're just going to kind of be in that range, but I want you to feel that this extra 10 pounds gives you more feedback. Because when people are tight, when people have restrictions in those areas like that, think about how dormant his groin has been. It's like a wake-up call, right? So like this 10 pounds you're giving him gives him feedback now to be like, oh, there's my groin. And then all of a sudden it's like light bulbs. And then the body can start figuring out how to like actually articulate that movement when they're there. So I'm not opposed to loading exercise if it's just for feedback. Like that's a great way to, because it's just like touching someone, pushing them into a stretch gently or however we do it.
It's kind of what we do with the Jefferson curl.
Yeah, exactly.
Expose them, in a pike position.
Yeah. And that feedback turns into high intensity strength over time, because now all of a sudden they're going to stander and they're using more weight. So the sooner you can introduce them to what you want, the better. Because you don't want them to feel defeated all the time either. You want them to feel like they're getting wins. As long as they're feeling like they're winning, you're winning, right? So I would definitely. I'm not opposed to adding weight, light weight, and just giving them that feedback. I don't want to touch them anyway, so it's better to give them weight.
Yeah.
No, that's good. That's a good one.
How
Yeah.
about
And I, go
Yeah,
ahead.
Gav?
agonist activations? Like initially doing the range of strength standards, I think it was when you had the half side split and then those half side split liftoffs. And for me, that was a big light bulb moment for how to keep the lower back extended, and then use the outer hip to abduct. And I found it really carried over to my horse stance. I made the horse stance good mornings. Everything made more sense. Like, do you use, if someone's having a real hard time, say they have a sticking point in their horse stance, to kind of reinforce those agonist activations to give more sensory feedback for how to activate the the agonist muscles to pull themselves deeper? Absolutely.
And that's why the system's so good. So instead of me just throwing 100 exercises at you, just being like, figure this out, use them when you think is right, you present people to that step-by-step approach. So we're doing our static body weight static stretches. We're going to do our end range agonist activations. I'm going to introduce you to loading range, and then I'm going to introduce you to high intensity range work. And then you can always reference what you've already taught them. So by that point, if you're showing someone a horse stance, if you did the course right, you've probably shown them some agonist activation work already. I hope so. So you can use that now as a reference. Like, listen, in this horse stance, I want you to think about the abductions and adduction movement we were doing and how those muscles were engaged, and or you get them to do some before you do horse stance so that they know, okay, well, this is where I need strength right now to support the system. So yeah, absolutely, man. And that's why I really tried to think about how to systemize the flexibility so that you could basically have that approach of like, okay, we're going to start here and go here. And then you can reference everything you already showed them when you get to those points where you need to troubleshoot further. So yeah, that's perfect. That's what you have to do anyway when you get to that point. What's the first thing someone's going to say to you when they get into an unfamiliar position? They're going to say, I don't feel it. Right? Because most people want to feel something. So it's like, okay, or they feel it in the wrong places. So we have to use what we already know to get them to actually understand the movement. So that's a perfect example of how you would do that. Agonist activations are great for high intensity range work because now you need the support of the agonist muscles more than anything to make sure that they understand not to go too deep or too far and actually have control in that exercise.
Right on. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I think Mike was asking about the sides or the long lunge and the front split ISO.
Was that Michael or Gabriel? The long lunge?
That was me. Yeah, just like the qualities to look for. Is the long lunge and like an ISO front split, are those pretty similar, or are there like the differences to doing those movements?
They're pretty similar in what we want as an final outcome in our front split, which is like something that you want to be considering when you're in a long lunge. So the long lunge, the most important attribute of the long lunge is the straight back leg. That is the most important. So oftentimes with the long lunge, people will try to go wider and wider and wider because they can. If we can't coach them to back off, like as soon as the knee bends, that's where we want to be. But what's really sweet about the long lunge is in bending the knee, we can build hip flexion strength. So we want those hip flexors to be super strong at the end range of our front split. So as the hamstrings start to unlock, if the hip flexors aren't super strong, it's going to be difficult for us to learn how to pull into the position. So That's what I like the long lunge so much so, is that we can teach someone to gauge their depth through flexing the hips of the front leg. So sometimes if I've coached some of you guys, I may have told you to squat in the front leg on the long lunge. That's what usually I say to someone, is I say squat in the front leg. So what ends up happening is if you can get the back leg straight, okay, you're good. Now you just have to squat in the front leg, and you'll start to feel yourself move into this great end range through hip flexion rather than just that hip extension. And that's where you can start making breakthrough connections on your front split, is by learning how to flex the hips in the front leg. And once you know how to do that really well, the hip extension has to come along, and that will come along. Most of us know probably from our own journey that the hamstrings will come quicker. So as long as we're doing the work through our pike head to toe work, our Jefferson curls, hamstrings will come quicker than hips most of the time. I mean, I've worked with some people where the hamstrings are not coming as quick as the hips. So we just have to do more work on that, which is also why I've become a big proponent of training head to toe, regardless if someone's going to get head to toe. I've just been able to unlock a lot of crazy tight hamstrings, just applying a lot of those hit specific exercises for head to toe that way. But yeah, the qualities of the long lunge are maybe not as clearly outlined all the time. And the long lunge is a lot easier to, I guess, abuse than a horse stance, because the long lunge and the horse stance are kind of like our two big intros for splits. But yeah, it's the straight leg, the back leg being straight, bending into the front leg, and then building up that strength and stability to start flexing into the hips of the front leg over time. And if we can do that really well, teach someone to do that really well, maybe they won't get a front split super quick or what have you, but they'll get super strong in that position. And that's more important than anything. It's not them just like getting the splits. It's like being strong in that long position. So does that help?
Yeah, a lot actually. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. And then it makes it easier when you're doing a front split check-in, because like if you've established a strong long lunge, you're doing a front split check-in, you're not just trying to go as deep as you can. You're trying to maintain flexion through the hips and that extension you had in your long lunge. So it's again relatable to the two of them.
Cool.
Yeah, Lucas. Yeah, I think I can confirm about that long lunge pulsing, where when I first did it, I could feel it a lot in my hip flexor. And then, you know how I told you that when my front leg is on my heel, toe pointed upwards, and I feel my hamstring on fire. Then you told me to just place my front foot flat on the ground so that the emphasis is all on my hip flexor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah.
I could just like tell over time that, I can slowly move my back leg further back and then feel a lot more emphasis on my hip flexor.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was because you get your hips strong in the front, and that way you were able to find extension rather than just thinking, okay, I'm going to have better hip extension. It's like, so a lot of times the hip extension for front splits are already there. It's just being able to have strong hips, being able to flex the hips and be strong. And that's a big breakthrough. And I
think what's funny is that at the same time, one of my restriction is that I can't really flex my toe, my big toe. So at the same time, I'm actually stretching my big toe as well as my hip flexor.
Sweet. Yeah, I've worked with a few people who the limiting factor in their front split in the back leg was plantar flexion. So like they couldn't point their toes. Like it was like a rigid foot. And I was like, wow, I've never experienced, never really thought about assessing that. But some people can't actually plantar flex really well. And when the leg goes behind them, that externally rotated knee is because that foot is like rigid stiff. And that would be like a starting point for them, like tibialis stretching, tibialis work, opening the foot up. And then, that's why assessment is so important. Like when you're assessing someone's movement capacities, and just trying to figure, okay, what's going on here? Like, is it just the hips but yeah, I've ran into that a few times where it is the tibialis and plantar flexion was just so jammed up. Like that was getting that actually opened up their hip extension and front split. Their hip extension wasn't bad because you watch them do other movements. It's weird. And the hip extension was like good, but when it was in that position and the foot was flat, it was just like shit. So yeah, kind of funny how certain things like that come up when you go deeper, but yeah.
Yeah. Would you break it like if you can't plantar flex your toe and then that kind of limits your end range for doing the long lunge pulse and the emphasis in your hip flexor, would you kind of break down the movement or the stretch to first stretching your big toe and then that would open up the stretch for hip flexor for the long lunge pulse?
Yeah. Like I would probably just build like a front split protocol that was more focused around that. So it'd be, couch stretch, plantar fascia stretch of the feet, some just addressing like basically creating more of a scaled front split session. But maybe have something more focused on like ATG split squats. Yeah, it would just have more focus around trying to correct that, but still still be the same system. I would still just be looking at the same. Okay, I'm going to go to front splits, head to toe is also one that would probably help as well. Start building some protocols at this level. I usually, if there's pain or injury or some kind of major setback, I'll usually will cut out specific range work from the protocol because I know that the strength and the inner range stuff is what's needed the most, but still have someone using the same system. But yeah, that's exactly what I would do. I would just look at that template and just kind of make something different.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Good question. Anyone else have any thoughts around that kind of topic? This is more of a heavy topic for us. Like this will be something that you'll want to talk more about the more you work with people, or the more you want to take someone to another level. This is where coaching high intensity range work is. Yeah, this will separate you if you can coach this stuff really well. This will separate you from other people. Like you'll be able to take people to other levels. So you can just see probably from some of those tips I gave you, the long lunge, squatting into the front leg being more important. Like that is like, that's a tip that'll help you take someone to another level. And even like Gabriel, he's probably going to do horse stance with that guy now and win. He's going to have a huge win with that guy just because we just troubleshooted, like, this is how you should approach it. And, so yeah, guys, this is, if you can figure out how to coach this stuff and troubleshoot plantar flexion and, the first steps for a back bridge, like those little milestones that you can create for someone and create that experience. And you just use, like, when you get good at using the system, like the system works, you just got to be able to troubleshoot for individuals differently. You'll be able to take people to another level. You take your own training to another level too. I mean, for me, it was when I started trying to figure out how to systemize my training. Like this whole preparatory strength specific I've been doing for almost 4 years now. And that was when I unlocked my side split. And that was when, things started happening for me. It's creating some kind of structure around my flexibility training. So that's, yeah, this lesson is when things start to change for you as a coach. Like as a range of strength coach, you get good at high intensity range and programming it, troubleshooting it, and you're going to get like really good results, crazy results with people. Cool.
I have a question
Yeah.
for the horse stance.
Yeah, man.
I've had another person try horse stance that I didn't mention before. And what do you do when they go too much into knee flexion and feel their quads too much? How do you cue for that?
So the knees are kind of tracking over the toes more.
Yeah.
I would do horse stance good mornings.
Mm.
It's like trunk
Good.
movement and horse stance gets people to figure out their hips. It's like the easiest way. Side to side squatting and like go get into a horse stance and do side to side squats is a good one. Still like my favorite warm up. But that articulation of the hips, I love the good mornings. Even for pancake more, because I had some wins recently with clients using the just the ISO. I shared it with Michael, I think. Was it the ISO? I think I put it in the foundations program too, because it's people have been making a lot of connections with that exercise, but it's just a horse stance pancake is what you could kind of think of it as. But yeah, that's exactly what I would do, because in doing so, like if you do look up traditional horse stance protocols, they're crazy strict on upright torso. But look at our seated good morning. Like we've had crazy wins with seated good morning, but you just do it without the bench, which is even better too, because now you're not restricted to a bench, right? Because that's the other thing I hear coaches asking me, like, or clients, I don't have a bench, just do a horse stance good morning. It's like, you don't need a bench, it's the same movement. And it's even stronger for your legs and they can figure their hips out even more. So it's like the side split push-up. When you do the side split push-up, the goal is to move the trunk down so that you actually unload the hips. If you unload the hips, you can find a deeper flexion and a deeper tilt and go into better extension. So then you move back into the trunk coming upright into extension, and now you try to hang on to that. So if someone was tracking over their toes, I would do a good morning. So when they come down, I would teach them to drive with the good morning. In that situation, I would teach them to drive the hips back super far so that then the knees go back. And then I would basically, if I could, I would put my hand on their knee and tell them to bring the torso up without letting the knee move forward. Or you could use a dowel, like just hold a dowel there so that they know the knees. Yeah.
That's a good one, actually.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Any of the splits, the lateral split work, side split pancake, we can have huge wins with getting people to figure out their trunk first. So trunk flexion and extension, lateral flexion and extension, like learning how to do the QL bends, the side bends. So now they can actually, the obliques and those things aren't going to block them when they try to get into deeper lateral positions.
I've been playing with that horse stance good morning that you posted the other day. You had the barbell in like a Zercher kind of a hold there.
Yeah, that's a sweet one. Yeah.
And so much more feedback, like reminding you to pull your chest up as you drive the belly button down, and just having that weight right in that position, just it really lets you know. Yeah.
Yeah, I find having the weight really localized in the trunk, like where we want to be driving the hips down. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Think of there's so many ways we can play with horse stance. It's so cool because the options are endless now with getting someone good at a horse stance. And you know what I mean? Like it's okay, let's work on our horse stance squats, our horse stance good mornings, our horse stance holds. 4 to 6 weeks prescription for like just that one movement is recommended. Or you could maybe do a horse stance flow and have one of them being like the primary one that we're going to be doing work with. But yeah, there's like so many options there to win with someone, not just to send them into a side split, but to just get them crazy strong in lateral outer range, which is like it's the most limiting range you'll work with anyone in the lower body. No one has groin flexibility or strength. Yeah. Those adductor lifts are a good win too for inner range work with side split. They complement all the outer range work. Oh, that was good stuff, guys. A good discussion. Lots of gold there to go back on and listen to. So I will post this up once it's done. And I'm just updating the lessons. And just, if you've already done the cert, it's cool to go back and just look at how some of them have been updated. But I've been putting just some of the other range supports into the lessons as well too. I'll attach time under tension, the call with this lesson, because this is where time under tension methods become more important for us, is when we start getting into the high intensity work. We need to know those strategies. That's how we're going to make big wins. So that's great. Did you have another question, Gavin?
Nope. Oh, sorry.
It's all good. All right. Thanks for jumping on, guys. Hope you have a great week. Just drop me a message if you have any afterthoughts, and we'll go from there.
Thanks, Lucas.
Lucas.